Chris here. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite things, Chinese tea. It's getting pretty popular here in the US right now, but like a lot of times when things get popular, people don't necessarily have good information. And then what comes of it is, you lose a lot of history, but you also, especially when it comes to things like food, it tastes wrong. Um, Tea is pretty easy. You think, oh, you just put water in, right? I mean, that's about as simple as it gets, right? But the thing is, if you leave the tea leaves in the water too long or the water's too hot, it will turn bitter. And I find a lot of people, when I say, "Oh, I'm into tea," and they're like, "Oh, I don't like tea. It's too bitter for me." Well, imagine if someone said, "Hey, you know, don't you like this kind of food?" And every time someone gave you the food, it was always charred and burned. You wouldn't like the food, but you really wouldn't even know what it's supposed to taste like. Same thing with tea. Tea isn't supposed to be bitter. Chinese tea is not supposed to be bitter. So if it is bitter, it's been in the water too long and the water's been too hot. So that's the first thing to know. The second thing is, so how do you brew it? Well, the first thing I'm going to say for that is you need a proper utensil for brewing. And the main thing that makes a good utensil, a good cup, a good strainer, whatever, is that you have to be able to separate the water and the tea relatively quickly. Um, there's plenty of teapots, and people put the tea leaves in the teapot and then they pour the water in. And the thing is, as long as those leaves are in the water, they're still brewing. And so you want to be able to pull it out quickly and easily. And the brew times you will very often find online. People say at this temperature for this many minutes. And unless your water is very lukewarm, most of the time you do not want anything to brew for minutes. Usually, if I'm going to brew something, we're talking anywhere from as short as 5 seconds to 30 seconds. That's the kind of brew times we're talking about. And it depends on type of tea. The lighter the tea is, if it's a white tea or a green tea, then it wants cooler waters and shorter times. If it's a darker tea, like a really smoky oolong, a black tea, or pu'er, those you can brew longer at hotter temperatures. And the thing to be mindful of is that you can always underbrew something, then brew it again. But once it's overbrewed, it's overbrewed. There's no going back. It's like a haircut. You can always cut it shorter, but once it's cut short, it's not going to get long, until the hair grows back. It's not going to unbrew itself. So, that in mind, you want something you can separate easily with. This is a nice $15 cup with a strainer. It's nothing fancy, but it makes tea for me, and it does it well. And this thing's lasted 2 or 3 years so far with no problems. So if you're just looking to start getting tea, you can get something like this. You will typically want to put, I'd say like maybe 2 spoonfuls of tea is a nice guesstimate. If you have a Chinese soup spoon, one of those is a good guess. But you'll get a good feel for it in terms of how much tea to put. Some people want to start going to exact grams. I don't feel like I want to run my tea hobby like a drug habit. So, get a nice good estimate for you. Get a tea kettle that'll work for you. Most of the time when you are heating water, you don't want to go to boiling. You want to get it before it's boiling. Before boiling is at the hottest temperature, and lower temperatures are basically when you start to see steam emit. So for that reason, this tea kettle doesn't have like the cap and the whistle, which a lot of people rely on to know when their tea's ready. This one, I can actually see the steam come out the spout when it's getting warmer, and that actually lets me figure it out. The other thing is that this one is not terribly well heat insulated, which actually means I can put my hand against it and feel how hot the water is. Um, it's not really scientific, but I've had this for many years. You can see it's pretty beat up. It's seen some things, and if you're comfortable with it, and oh, that's the sound my kettle makes when it's this hot. Oh, this is the temperature I can feel from the back of my hand on it, and know what temperature you're working with. These are things to play with. When you are brewing and you put your water in, you may want to give it a little circle to how you're pouring it to maybe help swish the leaves a bit. In this case, like this cup is really great. It has a natural shape that causes the water to kind of tumble. So I don't need to do a lot with it. The second thing is basically getting a good guess on how long to brew. Right now, this water has reached a pretty cool temperature, and this is the second brewing of this tea, so it's not going to need too long to, it's not going to need too long in general, but because it has a cooler water, it's going to take a little longer. So I'm probably going to give this thing maybe 20 seconds of brewing, whereas other times it could be as something like, I don't know, 7 to 12. And it depends on, the other thing it depends on is your brewing style. There's plenty of tea traditions where what they want to do is they want to get the maximum flavor from one brew. And, that's a pretty cool thing. It shows that you have some expertise with the particular tea that you're working with and the temperature and all the tools you're using. But I find it's also one of those things that is kind of sort of a rich person's hobby. Let's look at it this way. If you're going to get just right, if you screw up, you're definitely overbrewing it. So you're reaching close to overbrewing it. And if you overbrew it, you've wasted the tea. If you do it exactly right, then you've gotten the most flavor from the first brew. And that means you're not really going to get more or better flavors from any other brew that you do. So then what do you do if you want more solid flavor? Put a fresh batch of leaves in, and tea is not cheap. So the people I learned from and the folks who I worked with, they pretty much said, hey, go light the first time, and basically try and get 2 or 3 brews from any set of leaves. If you can get 2 or 3 brews, you get a nice set of different flavors, and you get to really feel out what the tea is like. That's my preference. Other teas you can definitely get more brews from. So the lighter teas like a white tea or green tea, you can usually get 2 or 3. If it's kind of a middle of the road tea like some of the greens, oolongs, you can get like 3 to 5 before you lose flavor. And if it's something heavy like a pu'er, you can get like 8 to 10 brews from it before you lose flavor. So that's kind of the other thing to consider. Is like, how much tea do I want? How long do I plan to sit here? When I was, working admin, I'm always getting interrupted. So this cup and pu'er was great because pu'er is probably the only tea of like your general Chinese teas that isn't going to go bitter. So if I'm brewing tea while I'm doing something and then someone calls and someone comes in the office and 20 other things happen, and 8 minutes later I look and the cup is like black with tea, at least it won't taste bitter. Or if, for example, what would also happen is like, I'd have some tea, and then afterwards I go have a meeting, I come back, I make some more tea. I could keep using the same leaves throughout the whole day. And so I didn't have to keep, shoveling more tea in or getting new tea bags. So that was kind of a nice benefit to that too. So let me see how this works. So for a second brew, this is not bad. I probably should have heated the water a little more, but I am getting a pretty solid flavor from it, and I'm definitely getting the tones of, it has kind of almost an apricot mango-y tone to it. And some people can judge based on the color of the tea, and if you're doing that, you probably want something like a white teacup where you can kind of see the colors a little better. But yeah, I usually like to go based on, feeling the temperature, trying the tea a few times, and seeing how it works. If you look up online and they tell you do it for this long, for this many minutes, problem is, one, you can get the same type of tea, but different places will have dried it differently. The different tea farms will have processed it differently. The same tea can vary year to year. So if you get the same tea from the same place, you may actually have to brew it a little shorter, a little longer, and the flavor can change completely. And this is why I just don't trust like a book or an internet thing that says, do it this one way every time, it'll always be right. Whatever it is, you still have to learn what the tea is. You have to learn what this particular tea is and how it works. The first time you brew it, the first time you're ever trying out this particular tea from this year, from this type, you're like, okay, well, let's see how this goes. And you have a guesstimate based on lighter tea, cooler and shorter, darker tea, hotter and longer, but that's about it. And, usually by the second or third time you're going to sit with the tea, you have a good feel for it and you can really get the flavor. So brewing for flavor is step one. You can always go into all kinds of ritual. You can do a sniff cup and pour it out like this and do it in this order. That's great. But number one, does the tea taste good? So that's my first question. Um, I know right now you can look up a lot of stuff. There's books and stuff, but make sure you're brewing it right. Don't waste the tea. If you go to a place and they're selling you tea that tastes bad, either brew it yourself or go somewhere else. So take care and have fun.